To begin, you're going to want to take a damp sponge and wipe down your pot to make sure that the pores are all open and there's no dust clogging up your piece so it can absorb the most glaze possible. Then I'm giving the glaze a good mix, making sure that nothing is left at the bottom so that all of the ingredients are incorporated. And I will grab my pitcher, fill that up, and I'm going to glaze the inside of my piece before, and then we'll go ahead and spray the outside. So I'm just pouring into the piece, and then I'll rotate around, pouring off the excess. It's very easy to get a bit of glaze on the outside, but that's quickly cleaned up with just a little bit of a damp sponge. And then you're going to want to let this piece dry for a few minutes, maybe a good 10 to 15 minutes, so it has a chance to dry. We'll turn on the air compressor by flipping that switch up, and then to attach the container to the spray gun, you just twist it on. It does take a bit of twisting to get it all the way on there, but you want to make sure it's nice and tight so your glaze doesn't pour out. And the air compressor will come on and off intermittently, just don't worry about that. And then we can take the lid off and we're ready to pour our glaze into the container. And you'll be surprised at how little glaze you actually need. I poured more than enough for this one piece, but spraying does have your glaze go a really long way, which is super nice and less wasteful. Making sure it's super tight, and then I'm going to grab a piece of cardboard that's in a little bucket below the glaze booth, and this just makes it easier to move your piece and also easier to clean up at the end. And then I'll grab my piece that has had a chance to dry. And before you spray your piece, you want to test out the spray and make sure you're getting an even spray before you go on to your actual piece. So then you want to keep your piece moving so that you're getting an even coat. If you let it sit still, you'll get wet spots. And we're just going to go in up and down motion. And I'm continuing to check the pressure and feeling free to stop when I need to and give it another push. And going in far away, about like 1.5 feet away from the piece, and just going in an up and down motion coats the piece evenly. And you're going to want to wait for that coat to dry, and then we'll do another. So I've waited for my piece to dry, and I gave a good shake to make sure that nothing was settled inside of the container, and I'm good to give it another second coat. So spraying gives you a super thin, even application, and it dries relatively fast because it pulls all the water out of the glaze. But you do still want to wait in between coats to get an even, thin coat that will dry well. So with the leftover glaze, I can pour that right back into the pitcher, and I'll pour that pitcher right back into the big bucket of glaze. So my piece is dry at the bottom. It's a little more wet at the top, but I'm going to move that off of the area so we can do some cleanup. You can reuse that piece of cardboard or you can toss it. Then I've got some fresh water, and I'm going to fill up the container like we did with the glaze, but instead with water. So we can spray it through to clear the nozzle and make sure there's no glaze left over in there or contaminating the next person's glaze. And it's also a really easy way to clean the booth down. So putting on that lid nice and tight, and we'll spray down the booth to clear the nozzle and also get rid of some of that excess glaze that's everywhere. And all of that water that's dripping down will drain off into the little bucket that is below the booth, so you don't have to worry about making a mess. And it's not going to be perfectly clean, but we want to do a good job of hosing down the area to avoid any buildup of dust. You don't want dust in the studio. It's not good to be breathing in dust. And you'll notice I'm wearing a respirator. It's not necessary that you have a respirator, but it's important that you have an N-95 grade mask or higher. And we do not provide those at the studio, so if you're planning on spraying, you do want to have one of those ahead of time. So I'm just getting the whole booth wet, spraying it all down. And then I'll go in with a sponge after to try and wipe off as much as I can. And I can just dump the extra water out. I left the little cup upside down to dry. And you can see that the spray gun is hanging over there so it doesn't get damaged or anything like that. I'm just wiping down the walls and the base and anything I can to help avoid any dust buildup and leave it as clean as possible for the next person. And we'll turn the little compressor off. And the final step is going to be wiping off excess glaze from the bottom, just leaving about 1/4 inch in case the glaze runs. Spraying on gives you a nice even coat, but it's still better to be safe than sorry.